All right, I'd like to bring into the conversation independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, joining us for the first time ever on Up with Chris Hayes. Thank you, Bernie, Senator, for getting up. I really appreciate it. Senator, I want to ask you. You have proposed some solutions to this, and I'd like to hear what you think some of the solutions are for both the general problem that we've been talking about with Jack Abramoff here, and also the post-Citizens United problem of money in politics.
Well, Chris, let's be very clear. If you are concerned about the collapse of the middle class, if you're wondering why the United States is the only country in the industrialized world not to have a national health care program, if you're asking yourselves why we pay the highest price in the world for prescription drugs, or why we spend more money on the military than all the rest of the world combined, you are talking about campaign finance. You are talking about the unbelievable power the big money interests have over every legislative decision made in the House and the Senate. And now what you're talking about is a horrendous situation made much worse by Citizens United. With Citizens United now, what you're really talking about is politicians being adopted, if you like, by corporate interest or very wealthy individuals, becoming wholly owned subsidiaries of very wealthy entities. Furthermore, what people, I think, do not fully perceive about Citizens United is it's going to make a kind of nervous Senate and House even more nervous when they come up to vote on an issue dealing with Wall Street or the insurance companies or the drug. They're going to think twice. If I vote this way, when I go home in a few days, am I going to have millions of dollars of ads attacking me for that vote? So there is no question in my mind that what we need to do is pass a constitutional amendment. Ted Deutsch of Florida in the House and I have introduced that amendment, which essentially overturns Citizens United and says the very radical statement that corporations are not people, that Congress and state legislatures have the right to address campaign finance reform.
But Senator, I want to sort of play this out with you, because let's say that given current Supreme Court jurisprudence, we actually are at a place where we need a constitutional amendment. My colleague Dylan Ratigan has been talking about a constitutional amendment. It's not dissimilar. In order to get a constitutional amendment, you have to create a public consensus around the issue. And it seems to me if you make the argument about campaign finance in terms you just made it, which is that, listen, progressives, if you want social democracy, you need campaign finance reform. That's not going to be an argument that is able to marshal the level of social consensus necessary to get a constitutional amendment passed, which, let's be honest, is just about the highest bar we have, right?
No, Chris, I strongly disagree with you. I think right now, whether you are a progressive, whether you're a Democrat, but in fact, many Republicans are profoundly disgusted with what is happening in Washington. And they understand. People may have honest differences of opinion. They understand there is something wrong with American democracy when you have a handful of billionaires, when you have Karl Rove, when you have the Koch brothers putting hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process. Very few people that I know think that has anything to do with American democracy. I think, in fact, this becomes an extraordinary opportunity for grassroots organizing. This becomes an opportunity for city councils to begin getting involved, making demands on Congress, state legislatures, voting on this issue. I think we can educate and organize millions and millions of people to say we have got to restore democracy in America, and we can't have a handful of billionaires controlling the political process.
Jack, I have Jack Abramoff here who wanted to respond.
Yeah, no, I actually, and I never thought I'd say this, but I generally agree with the Senator Sanders on some of this stuff. But I think, again, as we said in the last segment, you've got to remember this is not just a bunch of right-wing billionaires. You have George Soros, you have labor unions. There are a lot of people playing with money in this system. And I think that the more we make this about conservatives are the villains and this one's the villain, I think we're never going to get anything done. One of the things that I'm trying to do, I'm personally trying to work with the reform groups now and trying to lead them as a former lobbyist and somebody who knows this system a little bit, how to get things through to a point where consensus can be reached among conservatives, among progressives. And if that doesn't happen, nothing is going to happen in this country, let alone constitutional amendment.
Sure. Senator, I want you to respond to that.
Well, I think Jack makes a valid point. No one is suggesting that the Democratic Party or the president or others are not going to be involved in super PACs. I think the evidence is that the Republicans will benefit from it. It was, after all, Mitch McConnell who was a part of an amicus brief supporting Citizens United. But I won't argue. I think this whole process stinks throughout the political spectrum. I think we have got to do everything we can, not only to overturn Citizens United in a bipartisan way, but you got to go further. And I think what you need is public funding of elections. I think we have to restore the belief in the American people that ordinary people who have good ideas can stand up, talk to their fellow citizens, and get elected based on those ideas, based on the support they have, and not on big money.
I think that's a key thing here, which is that, and Katrina, I want you to speak to this, the perception that battles in Washington are not won on the merits, right? I mean, that's the fundamental issue here, which is that there's some debate, the Stop Online Piracy Act, and that at the end of the day, we're going to come together, we're going to debate it, and the decision just will not be issued on the merits. It will be issued based on who's got the most money behind it.
No, I mean, good morning, Senator Sanders. We were talking earlier in the context of Jack Abramoff's career about the problem that there's a view that government is rigged against ordinary people, that you have all these special interests. But I wanted to ask you, I mean, you have worked diligently on behalf of the middle class, on the most vulnerable in this country. Senator Sanders, you thinking of a Frank Capra-esque move that people who are committed to taking back our government might do. You've gone on the floor and read letters from your constituents about heating oil problems, about their what if a transpartisan group of senators and congresspeople went on the floor day in, day out and just talked, as Senator Durbin did once in a moment of honesty, about how the banks own this place and gave examples of what was going on in the Congress. And I think it would move people to say, look, there are people inside this House who are speaking for the American people, but also to expose and maybe avert this chilling, freezing impact you're describing that is so dangerous about what might happen if the Chamber of Commerce, for example, threatens someone.
Senator Sanders.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and I have done that, read letters from my own constituents. We ask constituents in the state of Vermont to tell us, what does the recession mean to you? And the stories that came back to me were so painful, it was literally hard to read more than 3 or 4 of them at the same time. And I read some of those on the floor of the Senate. Other members have done the same. So I think that's a good idea, but what we have to remember, we're countering a mass media, television, newspapers, which go a long way to deflect attention from the collapse of the middle class, the increase in poverty. How much discussion has there been in the media about the fact that we have more people living in poverty today and what that means than ever before? What does it mean? How many Americans even understand that we are the only nation in the industrialized world without a national health care program? 45,000 Americans die every single year. Do you hear much of that discussion? So going on to the floor is, I think, a very positive thing to do. And I think it does connect with ordinary people. But more importantly, we are going to have to develop a bipartisan political movement which says, you know what? This country, people have fought and died for democracy in this country. We have a great document called the U.S. Constitution. We cannot allow 5 Supreme Court justices to tell us that corporate interest can control the political process.
Senator Sanders, Joe Sestak wanted to add something.
Hi, Senator. I think you are spot on with this proposal, and you should go for it. Although I don't like changing the Constitution just because both sides have always said, here's why I want to change it. But that said, the Constitution already says we, the people, not we, the corporations. What about a piece of legislation in a pragmatic way that Congress could say, okay, the people of the corporation who own it, the shareholders have to vote for where the money will go and approve the ad. We already passed legislation that says the shareholders should vote on compensation, for example. I mean, and so why not a practical solution like that right now?
Senator Sanders, I want to get your response to that right after we take this break. Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont will be back with us right after we take this break. All We're back with independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders, former Congressman Sestak here just raised the possibility of one way of dealing with Citizens United, short of a constitutional amendment, is a piece of statutory of legislation that would say that actually shareholders have to, at the very least, vote on, sign off on any political expenditures. What do you think of that idea?
I think it's a great idea. Look, if I am a stockholder, if I have money invested in a corporation, that corporation is spending money against something that I believe in, do I have a right to voice that concern? Of course I should. The other things that you can do, short of a constitutional amendment, for example, is, Chris, if I put an ad as a candidate, and I'm running for re-election, I put an ad on television, I have to say, I'm Senator Bernie Sanders, I approve this ad. There's legislation out there right now that we can't get any Republican support for, to say that if the CEO of Bank of America is putting money into an ad, let that CEO. Yeah. I'm the CEO of ExxonMobil. Yes. I approve this ad. And the third thing, which is of great concern, by the way, is if you have companies in this country that are controlled by, say, the Chinese government, Chinese money, right now they can play an active role in putting ads on television. I think most Americans think that would be a crazy idea, so we want to make sure that at a certain level, foreign interests are not intervening in American politics.
Bob Herbert here.
Senator, I agree with you that you need bipartisan support if you're going to succeed with the constitutional amendment. What's the argument that you make to ordinary citizens who are conservatives, Republicans, on behalf of the amendment? Why should they support it?
Well, by the way, John McCain the other day, I don't know if you guys noticed that, said that he thought Citizens United was one of the worst decisions that he had ever seen. And that's a good start. I think the answer, Bob, that you give to conservatives is to say, you and I may have a disagreement. But I think you will agree with me that it is absurd that an individual, an entity, you don't like trade unions, well, they may give me or put millions of dollars into an ad. Do you really believe that that's what democracy is supposed to be about? And I think once you get outside of the belt, when you talk to ordinary people, many Tea Party people, they will agree. They are a grassroots organization. Many of them are working class people. I suspect many of them will not like the idea, do not like the idea, that a handful of billionaires can control the political process. So, Bob, in that sense, I'm not quite sure that the argument to conservatives, ordinary working class conservatives, is a different argument that you'd make to progressives.
I want to thank independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, for taking the time to join us this morning. Senator, I really, really appreciate it. Hope we can have you back.
Thank you.